Segment 2, Gold and Black Live. I'm one of my favorite people, and it's funny, and all we've been going through, Tim, and his name is Tim Newton, by the way. He needs no introduction, but the voice of Purdue football. But all that we've been going through, it's been one of the good things about this, even though we've been busy in our respective jobs, chance to kind of talk, and we've had a couple conversations during this time, but we're glad to be doing shows like this and still talking about sports, and maybe that helps us keep our mind off certain things, but we're also still in waiting to see what happens. But tell me about what your experience has been of late, and where your blood pressure is with all of this.
Well, I'm surrounded by my basement.
Yeah.
This is month 6 of working from home for me. My full-time job, as some people know, is in the Krannert School.
Right.
So we have been working remotely since the middle of March, and my group at least will be working there through the end of December, and we'll wait and see what the spring semester is like, but we may be in the same situation then. And I know we're going to talk about 9/11 here a little bit later, but every so many years in the world, there are pivotal points, and we define a new normal. And so now we just have to say that right now this is the new normal, and where it ends up, we'll find out, and how long it's going to be before we get back to whatever we think is normal. But I've been very fortunate. My family, we have not lost any income because of this, because my wife and I have both been able to work at home. Certainly, I miss not being at Ross-Ade Stadium. I wish I were preparing for a game tomorrow. And I will tell you, last Saturday was a very strange feeling, knowing that you could have been sitting in 100-degree heat index at Lincoln watching the Boilermakers play the Cornhuskers, and instead you were not.
Yeah. And it is that new normal that we're talking about that is hard to come to terms with, and yet we have to learn to accept these things and things that we can't change. You look at this was going to be an interesting football season for Purdue, and it hopefully will be at some point in time. But we're going to talk about your dream season broadcast tomorrow, but I want to talk about what this season would have been had we dreamed it. I love David Bell and Rondale Moore. We all are mourning the fact that isn't going to happen in Ross-Ade Stadium. That's one of the things. But, looking through the lens of this was going to be an important season, it still is, coming off a 4-8 season last year. But how did you look at this team coming in?
It's funny. We have another new show called Purdue Sports Weekly, which we debuted this week, and it's on Wednesday nights at 6 on the network. And Jeff Brom was one of our guests. And before we got on the air on Wednesday, he said, I didn't really recruit Rondale Moore to be a one-year player.
Yeah.
So you wish you could have had the opportunity to see a healthy Rondale and a healthy David Bell, because I think if people remember last year, they were on the field at the same time, but David was really injured throughout training camp. And we really didn't see the real David Bell until about week 4 or 5. Little did we know, when Rondale Moore and Elijah Sindelar went down on the same play against Minnesota, we would never see either of them again, not just last season, but ever.
Right.
I think this team certainly is going to be an exciting one to watch whenever it gets to the field, because it has a lot of offensive weapons. The offensive line hopefully will be able to give whoever the quarterback is time to throw, because you've got a lot of weapons. You've got a great running back core. I think you've got a good tight end core. The defense will be interesting. Bob Diaco is going to bring in a new style, a new system this year. You've got some pieces to build around. Certainly, I think George Karlaftis can be and will be one of the most dominating players in the conference. I really like the youth in the secondary and the talent back there. So I am just as anxious to get to the field as anybody else. I can't wait to see what this next version is. And the question now is, when is that going to happen?
Well, I think we saw about Jeff Brom, about how impatient, and rightfully so, about when it was a day after they announced, it was August 12th, wasn't it, or August 13th, when he came up with his plan to play. But I only think, and obviously we've both been around Jeff, you a lot more than I have, this is a guy that doesn't like to sit still, and this has got to be driving him bonkers. I mean, he's handled himself well, but how you got to believe he's just itching to get out there and get his team out there.
I asked him on the show what the reaction was from other people about his plan. He said, I really didn't care about the reaction. I just wanted to get something out there so that people would start talking and we would move this forward. And he said he probably will not watch very much football this fall, because it's kind of painful to be sitting there on a Saturday afternoon and not being able to play. So, yeah, he's I'm sure He's itching to get out, and they did resume some practice this week. They gave the players some time off, but they did get back on the practice field. And I think I asked him how long it would take to get the team ramped up, and I think we've seen some coaches say 5 to 6 weeks. I'm not sure he thinks it would take that long. So I think once we get the green light, whenever that is, hopefully the ramp up will be a little bit quicker than we had anticipated.
You're a communications guy extraordinaire, and that's your day job. It's been your career. The Big Ten has struggled in this area, it seems, and there's more to it probably than we know. But an interesting challenge just to get this to be able to communicate this effectively, and it's tough on a guy like Kevin Warren because he's new. You get an unbelievable, the most difficult experience maybe the conference has ever faced, in all honesty. But there's just a lot of fractured folks out there around the league. I mean, guys that are very vocal about wanting to play. Maybe when you have a team like Ohio State, you're going to be vocal. But how do you view that from a communication standpoint? Not necessarily how you would do it differently, but how do you make it better?
Well, I do think the two things have surprised me about this whole thing with the Big Ten. And I think the Big Ten through the years has been a very unified conference. I think maybe what separates the Big Ten from other conferences is the fact that it is a one for all and all for one scenario. Even though you've got the big boys like Ohio State and Michigan that have the big money and they fill the huge stadiums, the good thing about this conference is that it has been share and share alike. And so everybody's been on the same page. And to see, for instance, the reaction out of Nebraska, which was, I think, not just disappointing, but really kind of shocking to see that a conference member would go out publicly that day and really rip the decision that the Big Ten had made, whether you agree with it or not. And I know that there are a lot of people that don't. And, I don't know what the right decision is. I'm not privy to a lot of the information that all these people are looking at. I can only tell you based on what is coming out. I think the Big Ten did not do it. And the other thing I would say, not just the unity part of it, the Big Ten, I think, has always been pretty good at getting their message out and being ahead of the story. And this is one where they're chasing the story now. The narrative has gotten away from Kevin Warren and from the conference. And now other people are telling your story. And that's, the first thing they teach us in crisis communication is you have to be out in front of the story. Somebody's going to tell the story. And if you don't, they will. So I think the lack of transparency, or at least the lack of, if not external communication, because you're not going to tell the world what behind the scenes deliberations are, because that makes them not behind the scenes anymore. I understand that, but it seems like there's been a disconnect internally where coaches and athletic directors are being caught off guard by some of these decisions, and they're not being communicated with in advance. And I think that's been the surprising thing for me in this whole thing.
Yeah, I would agree. This has been the most unified conference almost to a fault, not only financially, but just the way that it's done its business over the years. And we've seen cracks in this. Again, that's also an indication of an unprecedented circumstance that we're dealing with. I don't think there's any question about that. All right, I want to talk some, because you are putting a broadcast tomorrow, which will be interesting. Anytime you have Pete Quinn on the broadcast, it's by definition interesting. But no, in all seriousness, the dream season begins tomorrow. And what a game you guys are starting with. I'm eager to see and hear that, I should say, in terms of that. But tell us a little bit about that. Purdue Ohio State 2000 is the game tomorrow. But tell us a little bit about the process.
So real quickly, the dream season is a thought that we had that let's since we can't do 2020 Purdue football the way it is right now, let's go back and let's give the fans a chance to relive some of the great games in Purdue history. And I can tell you they're all wins. So the one thing I did say, Purdue's going 12-0.
There you go.
What we've done is we came up with a list. We got it down to about 25, and then we whittled it from there. And each week we're going to give fans the opportunity to vote for two different games that they can hear. And they did that. And our choices this week, we had two games from the 2000 season, the Michigan comeback, which was a great game. And then, of course, the Ohio State Breeze to Morales game. And not surprisingly, fans by a 65-35 margin picked the Ohio State game. So what we're going to do on these, there are some games that we will have the original audio broadcast. There are some games that we will not. This one, believe it or not, is one that we don't. And the reason is, when I joined the network in 1995, Learfield was our flagship, our network. They lost the rights I think it was either after the 97 or 98 season. And for several seasons, we were with Host Communications out of Lexington, Kentucky, which ironically was bought by IMG, which has merged with Learfield. So we're all back in the same family now. The bottom line is Learfield has no tapes of that 2000 game. So Pete and I actually had to go in. We went in last night to the Kissel Center and Ross-Ade Stadium, and we reenacted that game. We're putting the entire thing in a 2-hour time span. So we're not going to run every play. For those of you who are old enough to remember the old Notre Dame football highlights from the 70s with Lindsey Nelson.
Oh, they were great.
We now move ahead to further action. But Pete and I call the game as if we're sitting in Ross-Ade Stadium calling the game live. And, you know, the funny thing is that game had so many twists and turns, even though you've seen it a dozen times, and even though you know how the game is going to turn out. When Mike Doss intercepts that pass from Drew Brees, your heart sinks. Because you go back and you remember the exact feeling that you had thinking the Rose Bowl is gone, Drew Brees' Heisman Trophy hopes are gone, everything is gone. And then in the span of, 2 plays, everything changed. So it was, and the other nice thing about the fun thing for us on this is we are going to have an interview on every post-game show with someone who was a big part of that game. So Seth Morales was a natural on this. So we get a brief interview with Seth about that game, about that season, and about what he's done since he left football, which he's doing very well for himself as the CEO of a company. So I think it's a great chance for not just current fans who maybe you might have become a fan in the Drew Brees era, and that's great. But I think it gives us a chance to familiarize people with Leroy Keys and Mike Phipps and Mark Herman and Jim Everett and Rod Woodson. And so the choices that you have of these games are going to include all of those players. And it's been a lot of fun for us. I mean, we really had fun last night putting that together.
I'll bet you did. And I'm looking forward to your recreation of the 64-yard pass to Morales. I'm going to guess that Brett Musburger has Holy Toledo trademark, so you may be going in a different direction. But I even like Gary Danielson's call there of calling it one of the greatest plays, greatest turnarounds he's seen. But yeah, you're going to have some fun ones. I'm looking forward to even some of those old games when I was a kid growing up and watching. And how you recreate those, because it'll be really fun to go back and look at all.
Yeah, I can tell you some of the video we'll be watching to do these games are black and white.
Yes, you got it. All right, I want to get to 9/11 because you're a Buffalo, New York guy, but a New York Yankees and a New York person, certainly, in terms of that 9/11. You may have been in the same proximity I was in West Lafayette, I'm assuming. But tell me about your experience and what this day kind of means to you, because it is I don't even know how you can call it a bittersweet day. It's a bitter day. It is a day of remembrance. And tell me what you feel.
I got 3 things that I wrote down. One is, and I saw one of your folks on your message boards as you were talking about recollections. Somebody said that they were in the Krannert drawing room watching the second plane hit the South Tower. Well, I was probably standing right next to that person. Yeah. I was in my office at Krannert that day when the first plane hit the tower. Jerry Lynch, who many of our listeners and watchers may have had for economics, was in the office next to me in the Dean Suite in Krannert. And he came in and said a plane had hit one of the Twin Towers. And I thought, as a lot of people did, well, probably a small plane, something happened there. We went out to the drawing room, turned the TV on, and you could tell immediately there was something big. And then we actually watched the second plane hit. And from then on, what I was doing, and of course, this is the days back, I don't think smartphones were a big thing back in 2000. So I was going back into my office, printing out all the news stories that I could and posting them. So I posted them out in the drawing room so students could stay aware. Obviously, you had a lot of people whose parents were from New York or maybe worked in that area, so they were concerned about what was happening. So just being around a group of people in that room when that plane hit the tower, and immediately you knew that the world had changed and was never quite going to be the same. The second thing is, when you work at Purdue, and I used to live right close to the Purdue airport, you get used to and almost numbed to the sound of the buzz of airplanes because we have a lot of planes going in and out. And what hit me that afternoon as I went home is the complete dead silence. Nothing in the air. And it just made the day even more spooky and more unsettling. The third thing, and sometimes you want to be lucky rather than good. A friend of mine, a guy named Rusty Roof, who Again, people may recognize his name. Rusty and Patty Roof have their name on the Purdue galleries. Rusty and I worked together in radio in Lafayette in the 1980s, and actually he slept on my couch one summer when he was going to grad school. Rusty was in New York on September 11th and was supposed to fly back to the West Coast. His secretary said, "Hey, I can get you on this other flight if you want to leave a little bit earlier." He turned it down, and the flight that he turned down turned out to be one of the flights that was hijacked and flown into the towers. So, you hear a story like that and you realize that life is full of random events and random choices, and you just want to be on the right side of those choices.
Yeah, you do. You absolutely do. We were fortunate enough in its own way to visit the Shanksville Memorial, which is quite worth doing if you're ever off. It's a little bit off the Pennsylvania Turnpike. We have a daughter that's in Philadelphia, but I was glad to do that. Just did that a couple weeks ago, and that was well worth doing. But it is a day that we don't ever want to forget, and it's a day that means a lot of different things to a lot of people. But Tim, I appreciate your recollection there, and we will definitely look forward to listening to the Dream season. Going to be really interesting. We all know that we'd rather be doing football, and you may get your first chance to do a February football game this year.
There you go. So 10 to noon on the Purdue Network. Most of the stations here in Lafayette on WAZE 96.5. It's on WNDE in Indianapolis. It's also going to be on the TuneIn app. So if you're not in the state and around, you can get it on the TuneIn app.
All right, that sounds great. Tim, thanks so much. We always appreciate you, but we appreciate your time and your perspective and all this. And we'll definitely be tuning in this fall, and we can't wait to get back in the booth to do something we all love to do, and that's watch college football.
I'll be in the basement if you need me.
All right, sounds great. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Alan.